It is 6:47 in the morning, and your eyes are open before the alarm even sounds. The ceiling above you is the same ceiling it was yesterday. The ceiling above you is the same ceiling it was every morning this month. Your hand finds your phone in the dark, not to check the time, but because checking the time feels like the first task of a long list that already feels too heavy. Before your feet touch the floor, your lips are already moving. Quiet words, half-formed, the same shape they take every day. God, give me strength for today. You whisper it the way you whisper things you have said so many times that the words have started to lose their edges, like a stone smoothed down by a river that never stops moving. You get up. You make coffee, or you don't, because some mornings even that feels like too much. You get dressed. You walk into a day that asks for more than you think you have. A difficult conversation you have been avoiding, a deadline that arrived faster than you expected, a child who needs patience you used up yesterday, a body that aches in places it didn't ache last year. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, you hear that prayer again echoing back to you. Strength. You asked for strength. And by 9 p.m., lying in the dark again, staring at the same ceiling, you wonder if the prayer even worked. Because you don't feel strong. You feel like you barely made it. You feel like you are holding everything together with both hands and your hands are shaking. This is not a story about willpower. This is not a story about trying harder tomorrow. This is something else. Something quieter, and something that might change the way you see every single morning that comes after this one. Here is the truth that nobody tells you when you are exhausted. You have been praying for strength every single day, and God has been answering that prayer every single day. But the strength you have been receiving doesn't look like what you expected. It doesn't feel like a surge of energy. It doesn't feel like waking up lighter, or suddenly having more hours in the day, or finding that the hard conversation got easier because you prayed about it. It feels like making it to the end of the day. It feels like still being here, still breathing, still showing up, even when everything in you wanted to give up an hour ago. And you have mistaken that survival for failure. You have looked at your exhaustion and called it weakness, when it might actually be the clearest evidence that strength was given to you, used by you, and spent for someone else, for something that mattered, for a day that needed you more than you knew. What if the strength you've been praying for was never meant to feel like power? What if it was always meant to feel like this, like barely enough but enough? Think about what your mornings actually look like, underneath the surface of them. You don't wake up dreading the whole day all at once. That would almost be easier in a strange way, because at least it would be one clear, nameable thing. Instead, it's smaller than that. It's the email you haven't answered yet, sitting in the back of your mind before you've even opened your eyes. It's the conversation with someone you love that didn't go the way you hoped yesterday, and you don't know how to fix it, and you're not sure today is the day you'll have the energy to try. It's your body, the tightness in your shoulders that's been there so long you've almost stopped noticing it, except now, lying still, you notice it again. It's the quiet awareness that there are people counting on you, and you are counting on something, anything, to refill whatever it is inside you that keeps running dry. And so you pray for strength, because what else do you ask for, when you can't even name what's wrong specifically enough to ask for something more precise? Strength feels like the right word. It feels like the word that covers everything. The email, the conversation, the tight shoulders, the people who need you, the parts of you that are running on empty. So you ask for it, sincerely, the way you've asked for it every morning for longer than you can remember. And then the day happens. It is rarely catastrophic. That's almost the hardest part. There's no single moment you can point to and say, that's where it went wrong, that's why I'm so depleted. It's just an accumulation. A meeting that ran long. A short, sharp word from someone that landed harder than it should have. A bill that arrived that you weren't expecting. A wave of tiredness in the early afternoon that no amount of coffee touches. None of it by itself is a crisis. All of it together by the end of the day feels like more than you had in you to give. And by the time you're back where you started, in that same bed, under that same ceiling, you take stock almost without meaning to. You ask yourself quietly, did I handle that well? And the honest answer most days is somewhere in the middle. You didn't fall apart, but you didn't feel strong either. You felt like you were running on fumes for the last few hours, holding your tone steady through sheer effort, getting through the final tasks because they had to be done, not because you had anything left to give them. This is the gap. This is the space between the prayer in the morning and the exhaustion at night, and it's a gap so many people live inside of quietly without ever saying it out loud, because saying it out loud feels like admitting that your faith isn't working the way it's supposed to. But what if the gap itself is not evidence of a problem? What if the gap is simply what it feels like to be a finite person, asking an infinite God for help, and receiving exactly the help you needed, measured out, daily, in a form so unremarkable that you walked right through it without recognizing it? There is a moment in the story of a man named Elijah that feels almost too familiar to be 3,000 years old. He had just done something enormous. He had stood alone against an entire system that opposed everything he believed in, and he had won. He had seen fire fall from the sky. He had seen God show up in a way that should have left him unshakable for the rest of his life. Picture it for a moment. The crowd around him, the impossible thing he'd just witnessed, the sense, however brief, of being on the very edge of something miraculous. And then, almost immediately afterward, a woman sent him a message that she wanted him dead. One threat. One sentence, really. And the man who had just stood unmoved in front of fire from heaven was suddenly running for his life through the wilderness, alone, with nothing. He ran a day's journey into the desert, and then he sat down under a single tree, and he said the kind of thing that people only say when they have nothing left to perform for anyone, when there's no one watching, no reputation to maintain, nothing left but the truth. He said, "It is enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." Picture that sentence for a moment. This was a man who had just witnessed one of the most dramatic displays of God's power in the entire Bible. Fire falling from the sky in front of an entire nation, and less than 24 hours later he was lying under a tree in the dirt, asking God to let him die. There was no transition. No gradual decline. Just triumph, and then, almost overnight, total collapse. If strength was about feeling powerful, Elijah had just failed the test of his life, spectacularly, and immediately after his greatest victory. If you've ever felt that whiplash, a good day, even a great day, followed by a crash so sudden it confuses you, makes you wonder what's wrong with you, why you can't seem to hold on to the good feeling, you are not reading about someone different from yourself. You are reading about someone exactly like yourself, recorded in scripture on purpose so that thousands of years later, you would know you're not the only one this has happened to. But that is not what happens next. God does not show up and rebuke him. God does not say, "After everything I just did for you, how can you be this weak?" Notice that, really notice it, because it matters. There's no lecture. There's no list of all the reasons Elijah should be grateful instead of despairing. God does something that, if you have ever felt the way you feel right now, might bring tears to your eyes. God sends an angel. And the angel does not deliver a sermon. The angel does not quote scripture at him, or remind him of the fire that fell from heaven the day before, or ask him to snap out of it. The angel touches him gently and says, "Get up and eat." And Elijah eats, and he lies back down, and he sleeps again. And the angel comes a second time and says it again. "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. The journey is too much for you." Did you hear that? God, through an angel, looked at one of the most powerful prophets who ever lived and acknowledged, out loud in scripture where it would be recorded forever, that the journey was too much for him. Not too much for someone weaker. Not too much because of some failure on Elijah's part. Too much, period. Just too much. And the response to that wasn't a pep talk, and it wasn't a rebuke, and it wasn't even, at first, a word from God at all. It was food. It was rest. It was being allowed to sleep again and to eat again before anything else was expected of him. Twice. The angel let him sleep, fed him, and let him sleep again. A full cycle of rest before a single instruction was given. Only after that, after the sleeping and the eating and the sleeping again, does God finally speak to Elijah directly. And even then, God doesn't begin with a command. God asks him a question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah pours out everything. His exhaustion, his sense of failure, his feeling that he's the only one left who still cares, his fear. And God doesn't argue with any of it. God simply, gently redirects him, shows him that he is not as alone as he believes, gives him the next step, just the next one, not the whole plan for the rest of his life. Just enough for what came next. If you have been waiting for God to show up in your life like fire from heaven, dramatic, undeniable, instantly transforming your exhaustion into energy, and instead all you've gotten is the strength to make a cup of coffee and get through one more conversation, I want you to sit with this for a moment. Maybe that is not God failing to answer your prayer. Maybe that is the answer. Maybe strength, in the hands of God, looks a lot more like an angel saying eat and sleep, and a lot less like a triumphant trumpet blast that fixes everything at once. Maybe it looks like permission to rest before you're asked to do anything else, permission to be fed before you're expected to perform, permission to simply survive today with nothing more demanded of you than that. There's another moment, much later, where the Apostle Paul, a man who had been shipwrecked, beaten, imprisoned, and rejected more times than most of us could survive once, wrote something that has been quoted so often it has almost lost its weight. He said that he had learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And then he said the line that gets repeated everywhere, "I can do all this through him who gives me strength." Notice the word he chose, learned. Not, "I have always known," not, I was simply given. What? That word implies a process, a journey, probably a long and uncomfortable one, full of moments where he hadn't yet learned it, where contentment and strength felt completely out of reach. Paul wasn't born with this. He arrived at it slowly, through years of exactly the kind of circumstances that would make most of us give up. Beatings, shipwrecks, hunger, betrayal by friends, long stretches in prison cells with no idea when or if he'd be released. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, I can do all this because he removed my hunger, my hardship, my chains. He said, I can do all this through him, meaning, in the middle of the hunger, in the middle of the hardship, in the middle of the chains. The strength wasn't a substitute for the struggle. It didn't arrive instead of the hardship, clearing the way so that life became easy. The strength was what allowed him to remain present, faithful, unbroken in spirit, while the struggle was still happening, while the chains were still on his wrists, while the hunger was still in his stomach. Paul wasn't writing this from a place of comfort, looking back on hardship that was safely behind him. He was writing it from prison, in the middle of the very circumstances the verse describes, which means this isn't a verse about strength removing your problems. It's a verse about strength being present inside your problems, with you, in the cell, in the storm, in the exhaustion, exactly where you are right now. So when you wake up tomorrow morning and that same prayer rises up in you again, God, give me strength, I want you to notice something different this time. Notice that you are still here to pray it. Notice that yesterday was hard and you made it through. Not because the hardness disappeared, but because something held you when you thought you might break. That holding, that quiet, unglamorous, unremarkable holding, is the strength. It was never going to announce itself with trumpets. It was always going to look like one more morning, one more breath, one more small act of getting up. Maybe you've been measuring your strength wrong. Maybe you've been looking for it in the moments when everything feels manageable, when you have energy left over, when the day goes smoothly and you feel capable and clear-headed. But what if your strength was never meant to be found there? What if it was hidden instead in the moment you almost didn't get out of bed and you did? In the moment you almost snapped at someone you love, and you took a breath instead. In the moment everything in you wanted to quit and somehow you didn't. There is a verse in the book of Isaiah that speaks directly into this kind of exhaustion, the kind that isn't dramatic, the kind nobody throws you a parade for, the kind that just quietly wears you down day after day. It says that he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Read that last part again slowly. Soar, run, walk. 3 different images, 3 different speeds. Soaring is for the moments of breakthrough when everything lifts and you feel unstoppable. Running is for the seasons of steady effort, when you're moving forward and making progress. But walking is for the days when you can barely lift your feet, when the only thing you can do is put one foot in front of the other. And the promise isn't just for the soaring and the running. The promise is also for the walking. Not growing weary, not growing faint. Just walking and being held while you do it. If today has felt like a walking day, not a soaring day, not even a running day, just a slow, heavy, one foot in front of the other day, I want you to know that this verse was written for exactly that kind of day. God's promise of strength was never reserved only for your best moments. It was written into the walking. It was written into the days that feel small and unremarkable and exhausting, the days where nothing dramatic happens except that you survive them. Maybe you've also been carrying a kind of guilt underneath all of this. A quiet voice that says, if your faith were stronger, you wouldn't feel this tired. If you trusted God more, this would be easier. If you prayed better, harder, longer, you would feel different by now. I want to gently set that voice aside for a moment because it is not telling you the truth. Faith was never meant to be the thing that removes your tiredness. Faith is the thing that lets you bring your tiredness honestly before God, instead of pretending it isn't there. There is a moment in the Gospels where Jesus himself, fully God and fully exhausted, got into a boat with his disciples and fell asleep during a storm. Not before the storm. During it. Picture the scene. The disciples, several of them experienced fishermen, men who knew these waters and had likely weathered storms before, were suddenly afraid for their lives. The waves were crashing over the sides of the boat. Water was pouring in. And in the back of that small rocking boat, in the middle of all that noise and chaos and fear, Jesus was asleep. Not pretending, not faking calm for effect, but genuinely, deeply asleep, the kind of sleep that comes from a body that has given everything it has and needs to recover. When the disciples woke him, panicked, shouting that they were going to drown, he didn't say, "Why are you panicking? Don't you know I'm in control?" He didn't shame them for waking him or for being afraid. He got up and he calmed the storm, wind and waves instantly still. But before that he slept. In the middle of danger, in the middle of chaos, the Son of God needed rest, and he took it even knowing the storm was raging, even knowing the disciples were afraid, even knowing that in a few moments he would need to act. He rested first. And the resting didn't make him any less ready, any less able, any less God when the moment came to act. If Jesus, in human form, needed to sleep in the middle of a storm, then your exhaustion is not a failure of faith. Your need for rest is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It might actually be evidence that you are deeply, fully human, exactly the way God made you to be, exactly the way Jesus himself was walking this earth, feeling tired, needing sleep, and still being fully able to calm storms when it mattered. Maybe the lesson isn't that you should never feel the storm. Maybe the lesson is that you can rest in the middle of it and trust that you will still be able to respond when the moment comes. Not because you stayed awake worrying the whole time, but because you allowed yourself to be human and let God be God even while the wind was still blowing. So here is something practical, something small, something you can carry into tomorrow morning without it becoming one more thing on your list. When you wake up and that prayer comes, God, give me strength, try adding just a few words to it. Try saying, God, give me strength for today, and help me trust that whatever strength you give me is enough, even if it doesn't feel like much. You are not asking for a feeling. You are asking for sufficiency. And sufficiency doesn't always feel impressive. Sometimes it just feels like getting through. Another small thing, at the end of the day, instead of only counting what you didn't get done, try naming one moment where you were held. It doesn't have to be big. Maybe it was a kind word from a stranger. Maybe it was a song that came on at exactly the right time. Maybe it was simply that you made it to the evening without falling apart completely, even though it felt close. Name that moment. Say it out loud even if it's just to yourself. That moment was strength. You just didn't recognize it while it was happening. And here's a third thing, maybe the hardest one because it asks you to do less rather than more. Somewhere in your day, it doesn't matter when, it could be for 2 minutes in the car before you walk into work or while the kettle is heating or right after you close your laptop for the night. Give yourself permission to stop performing strength even just for those 2 minutes. Don't fix anything. Don't plan anything. Don't even pray with words if words feel like too much. Just sit or stand or lie down and let your body be as tired as it actually is. Let your shoulders drop. Let your face stop holding whatever expression you've been holding for everyone else all day. This isn't laziness and it isn't giving up. It's the same thing Elijah was given under that tree, just in a smaller, daily-sized portion. Rest before you're asked to do anything else. If Elijah needed that after fire fell from heaven, you are allowed to need it after an ordinary Tuesday. One more thing, and this one is less about what you do and more about what you stop doing. Stop measuring today against some idea of what a good Christian is supposed to feel like by the end of the day. There is no scoreboard. There is no version of you somewhere out there who prayed better and therefore feels fine right now while you feel exhausted. There is only you today doing what you could with what you had, and a God who has already told you through Elijah's story, through Paul's prison letters, through Jesus asleep in a storm, that exactly this, the tired, ordinary, barely holding on version of today, is not a failure. It's the whole point. It's where strength actually happens, quietly, underneath everything you can see. And one more thing, when the exhaustion feels heaviest, when you feel like you are praying the same prayer into the same silence every single day, remember that prayer is not a transaction. It is not a request you submit and then wait for a delivery confirmation. Prayer is presence. It is you showing up, honest about your need, in front of a God who already knows exactly how tired you are, and who has not looked away, not once, not on your hardest day, not on this one. There's a woman in the Gospels who spent 12 years exhausted, not from a busy schedule, but from a condition that drained her, physically and socially, day after day, year after year. Try to imagine 12 years of this. 12 years of waking up already tired, of planning her days around a body that wouldn't cooperate, of being treated as untouchable by the people around her because of something she had no control over. 12 years of seeking healing and not finding it. 12 years of spending everything she had, her money, her hope, her energy, on doctors who couldn't help until there was nothing left to spend. By the time she reached Jesus, she wasn't strong. She was desperate and she was depleted in every sense of that word. She didn't walk up to him boldly and declare her faith with confidence, the way we sometimes picture biblical faith, chin up, voice steady, certain. She came up quietly from behind in a crowd, hoping no one would notice her because after 12 years of being noticed for the wrong reasons, the last thing she wanted was more attention. All she could manage was to reach out and touch the edge of his cloak, the very edge, the part furthest from him, as if even her faith felt like it only had enough strength to stretch that far and no further. And that was enough. Jesus felt it. He stopped. In the middle of a crowd pressing in on every side, people pushing, people calling his name, people demanding his attention, he stopped because of one small, trembling touch from someone he couldn't even see. And he asked who had touched him, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted her to know that her smallest act, her weakest reach, had been seen, had been felt, had mattered enough to stop everything. When she came forward, trembling, probably expecting to be rebuked for touching him in her condition, in front of everyone, he called her daughter. Think about that word for a moment. Not stranger. Not woman. Daughter. He told her that her faith had healed her, and he told her to go in peace. Not her strength. Her faith, which after 12 years of exhaustion, might have felt like nothing more than a single trembling hand reaching out in a crowd, hoping to go unnoticed, expecting nothing more than the smallest possible contact. If all you have today is a trembling hand, if all you can manage is a whispered prayer, a single reach toward God in the middle of everything that's wearing you down, that is not a small thing. That is the exact same kind of reach that this woman made after 12 years of being depleted by life, after every other source of help had run dry. And Jesus didn't measure the size of her effort against some standard of what faith was supposed to look like. He met her in it, fully, immediately, without hesitation, and he called her by a name that meant she belonged to him. Maybe that's what it means to be strong in God's eyes. Not unshakable. Not tireless. Not endlessly capable. Maybe it means reaching out even when your hand is trembling. Maybe it means whispering the prayer even when it feels like it's the same prayer you whispered yesterday and the day before and you're not sure it's doing anything. Maybe it means waking up tomorrow and doing it again, not because you feel strong but because something in you, something placed there by God himself, keeps getting you back up. Let's bring this before God together now. God, we come to you tired. Not pretending to be anything else. Just tired. We have been praying for strength morning after morning, and some days it feels like nothing changes. We still collapse at night. We still feel like we are barely holding on. But tonight, help us see what you've already given us. Help us see that we are still here. That we made it through today. That somehow, even on the hardest hours, something held us up when we didn't think we could stand. Thank you for being a God who sends rest before instruction. Who feeds us before he asks anything more of us. Who lets us sleep in the middle of the storm. We don't need to feel powerful tonight, God. We just need to feel held. So hold us now. In the quiet of this moment, let your strength meet us, not as a feeling we have to chase, but as a presence we can simply rest in. Tomorrow, when we wake and that same prayer rises again, give me strength for today, let us remember that you have never once failed to answer it. Even when it didn't look like we expected. Thank you for walking with us through the walking days, the slow days, the one foot in front of the other days. We love you. We trust you. And tonight we rest in you. Amen. If you've made it this far, maybe tonight is one of those nights where the ceiling feels heavy again, where the day asked more of you than you thought you had left. Before you close your eyes, take one slow breath and let yourself believe, even just a little, that you made it through today because you were held, not because you were strong enough on your own. Think back for a moment to that woman who reached out in the crowd. She didn't know, when her hand brushed against that edge of cloth, that it would be enough. She had no way of knowing in that moment whether anything would change at all. She just reached because reaching was the only thing left she could do. And it was enough, not because her reach was strong but because of who she reached toward. That's the same reach you've been making morning after morning with your tired prayer for strength. You may not have felt anything change in the moment, but something has been holding the threads of your days together quietly the whole time, and it isn't you. If this brought you even a small measure of peace, consider subscribing so that on the next exhausted morning, this voice is here waiting for you again. And if you have a moment, share in the comments what your version of a walking day looks like. Someone else somewhere is having that exact same day right now, and your words might be the reach that meets them. Tomorrow morning, when you open your eyes before the weight of the day settles onto your shoulders, let one quiet truth settle there instead. You do not have to feel strong to be held. You only have to be willing to be carried. And on the days when even that feels like too much to remember, that's alright too. The carrying doesn't depend on your remembering it. It was never up to you to hold yourself together in the first place. It only ever felt that way because no one ever told you it could be any different. And tonight, as you drift toward sleep, picture this. Not a finish line, not a mountain you have to climb tomorrow, but simply a hand, open and steady, already holding yours long before you even asked. The same hand that fed Elijah under the tree. The same hand that let Jesus sleep through the storm. The same hand that stopped in the middle of a crowd for a single trembling touch. That hand is not waiting for you to become stronger before it reaches for you. It already has. Rest now. Tomorrow will come. And so will the strength for it, quiet, sufficient, and already on its way.